I'd like to move on then to our last paper of today. It's a paper by Tse-Chun Lin from the University of Hong Kong, Yiyuan, Zhou, and Hongzhou. And the paper is called Unintended Externalities of Environmental Regulation, Evidence from the NOx Budget Trading Program. The paper will be discussed by Michinao Okachi from University of Tokyo. Tse-Chun Lin, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the organizer to include our paper in the program. This is Zhou works Yiyuan, who is also online, and also my colleagues, Zhou. So in this paper, we are going to talk about unintended externalities regarding regional environmental regulation, and we are focusing on the NOx budget trading program. And I'm going to explain to you what is NOx budget trading program. But before we get into the detail, let me opening the floor with a quote by the Economist magazine. So Economist in the last year issue, they mentioned that cracking down on carbon is a bit like squeezing a balloon. If you press it too hard all at once, then it may pop. But if you only squeeze in one corner, the air will simply flow where there is less pressure. So this quote basically epitomizes the things that we are doing. So give you a quick brief of the story. So there is a very small but burgeoning literature on the regional environmental regulation. And it has been shown that if you only impose environmental regulation at the local level, then those directly regulated, I mean firms are directly regulated, they are going to do a little bit things for their best benefit. For example, it has been shown that if you regulate one chemical that you cannot, or there is a higher cost to pollute, then they are going to use a different chemical as a substitute. It could be equally damage to the environment or to the public health. So it has been shown that there is a substitution in terms of the chemical being emitted. Or you can even imagine that if there is a local regulation at the state level in the United States or at a country level, then the very regulated firm, they can simply just shift their production to a different state that is less regulated, or even ship out the entire country to a different place, a different country with much less restricted regulation. So in the end of the day, if you take it as a whole, then regional environmental regulation, it does not really improve the welfare of the entire society unless you look at that very regionally. Okay, so it's not very surprising because this is what human nature. You pursue the best interests of your firm. If you are the CEO of the listed company, this is what you have to do to boost up your stock price. Even there's a regulation on you, you try to circumvent it. Okay, and we are focusing on more or less the same idea about the substitution, but we don't look at the directly regulated firm. We look at the unregulated firm, but along the supply chain. That is why we call it unintended consequences or unintended externality about this regional environmental regulation. Okay, and the reason we focus on this NBP program, like NOx, the nitrogen oxides, because this nitrogen oxide program has been shown to affect the directly regulated firm, and the directly regulated firms are the utility firms. So we are interested in knowing that for those not regulated by the NBP program, but they are the downstream firm, they are the high energy intensity manufacturing firm, what would happen to their emission policy? How do they respond to the increase in the electricity price induced by the NBP? Okay, so that's basically the story. And we can literally summarize our paper using this figure. So there's an NBP program here, and this NBP program directly regulated the energy supplier, which are the utility firms. So it has been shown in one AER paper that, well, yes, it works. It works perfectly. Because this is cap and trade, so it's not very surprising that the total emission of the nitrogen oxides went down. And then the local air gets cleaner. I mean, the regulated states, the states that were implementing NBP, the air gets cleaner, and then the health condition of the entire state seems to get better. So that's a one AER paper shown. So the picture, the upside of this picture looks very good. And then NBP seems to do what it was intended to do. But we argue in our paper, the story doesn't end here, because when the energy suppliers or the utility firm, when they are regulated, their production cost goes up because they have to follow the regulation of MVP. What's going on is that they are going to pass through the increased cost to their downstream, their customers. So the electricity price is also shown to increase. Okay, and we verify it. Electricity price goes up by around 7%. Then what happened is that the energy consumer, especially those like very hungry for energy take for the manufacturing, then their input production cost basically goes up because of the high energy electricity price. What happened is that we show that they are going to turn down their abatement because abatement is very costly. And what happened is that they are going to emit more harmful chemicals because they are not regulated by the MVP. And there is an unintended externality along the supply chain. And then due to this increased production cost, this high energy intensity manufacturing firm, they are going to increase their harmful chemical emission, especially via the air channel. So what happened is that although on average, the overall air quality goes up for the NBP regulated state, but unfortunately, the very, very local, the very neighborhood air quality around the manufacturing plants gets worse. Okay, and we are also going to show you who suffer from this worsened very local air quality. Okay, so basically this is the story of our paper. The rest of my presentation is simply just the details. Okay, so let me go through it. Well, NBP is regulating the utility firms, so it is intended to reduce the nitrogen oxides emission. Okay, and then it has been shown that if you want to comply, the NBP is very costly. The AER paper 2017 shows that the compliance cost could be like $1.1 billion per year, and they are going to pass this through along the supply chain to their customers, which are the manufacturing firm. Okay, and then we show that there are 7% increase in this electricity price. So the consequence is that this energy intensive manufacturing firm, they are going to experience a production cost shock, a positive production cost shock. And after that, what will be the response? So we are interested in knowing whether their emission policy are going to negatively respond to this electricity price shock. Well, why is that? It's because electricity accounts for around 28% of abatement operating cost. And then you can imagine that if it is very expensive nowadays because of the energy price shock, now if you turn on your abatement, it's going to be much more costly. And if you still have some slack, you still have some room, some safety margin to pollute. If that is the case, and especially when you are facing the shareholder pressure to push you for an earnings call, then that will be the case that there is a temptation for you to turn off the abatement. So that's the rationale. Okay, and how are you going to cut abatement? Well, there are many, many ways. For example, you can directly shut down the abatement facility, then you can save the energy cost. Or you adopt less capital intensive but less efficient abatement options. You are like reduce your engineer labor, you cut the contract services, or even delay the replacement of the depreciated abatement devices. These are all going to help you to reduce the cost. But again, these are all going to increase the emission of harmful chemicals. Okay, so the preview of our finding is that, well, the non-NBP regulated and in energy consuming manufacturing firm, sorry for the long term, but again, NBP is intended to regulate utility firm, but this downstream firm, they are not directly regulated. But what we find is that they are going to respond to this policy shock by increasing harmful chemical emission into the air. Okay, and the channel is going to go through the costly abatement activities. In order to convince you that this is really a kind of worsened response from the manufacturers, we're going to show you the economic and the managerial incentives channels. And finally, we are also going to show you that it is indeed due to the trade-off between the abatement cost and expected EPA penalty. And finally, our welfare analysis is going to show you that the air quality of the very local neighborhood that is close to the manufacturing plants is going to be worsened. And it tends to be the case that it's underprivileged communities are located around these manufacturing plants. So poor people are suffering due to these externalities. Okay, so what would be our contribution? As I mentioned, there is expanding literature on the substitution effects between the environmental regulations. So they are showing that, like Greenstone has a AER paper, and the Gibson as well, they're showing it's going to cross the media, across the different chemicals. And there are also papers showing that they are going to cross special, meaning that they are going to shift their polluting plants to somewhere that is less regulated. It could be within the United States, shifting from California to the other states, as been shown by the Bartram et al. JFE paper, or it can be shifted to a foreign country. So there are multiple papers showing that. But there is a less attention paid to the indirect effect, and we are one of it. So we are trying to contribute to this growing literature about the substitution, not directly on the regulated firm, because it's not surprising that the directly regulated firm are going to do something to help them to mitigate the environmental regulation shock. What we are trying to convince you is that the story doesn't end on the regulated firm. If there is an increase in the production cost, then the downstream firm can also respond in a negative way to this environmental regulation. Okay, and we show that there is an increased emission for the high toxicity chemicals. Okay, and so our main contribution will be on this substitution effect for the environmental regulation. We are the first paper to show that it is going to be a higher emission spillover along the supply chain. And we are also going to show you that this, by looking into the supply chain, like spillover along the supply chain, we will be able to understand the regional environmental regulations such as NBP. Okay, and it will be much more effective in the future for any regional environmental regulation if you are considering to a more like general equilibrium concept instead of just focus on the directly regulated firms. Okay, let me give you a quick review on what is NBP. So starting from 1997, there are states trying to petition to the EPA that the nitrogen oxides emission are really worsen the air quality, because the NOx is going to resulting in more ozones and more smoke and other health-related diseases. So there are petitions on this. So in 2003, downwind states, they start NBP program. However, there are some legal battles on the upwind state. So it's not clear whether the upwind states are going to implementing the NBP. And then starting on 2004, the upwind states started NBP. So the upwind states are here. And then the NBP ends in 2008. It was replaced by Clean Air Interstate Act. So there are 11 upwind states. Well, they did not participate in the very beginning of NBP until 2004. And it was not fully anticipated due to the legal battles. So we are arguing that it would be nice to use this almost like a natural experiment as a shock for these 11 upwind states as a treated states, and then for the NBP non-regulated states, any states outside the NBP regulated place would be the control states. Okay. And the data we are using are pretty standard if you are familiar with environmental research. So we are using the TRI database, and then we are also using the EPA pollution prevention for calculating the production. And we are also using the IRIS to calculate the toxicity of the chemicals. So summary statistics. So in the end, we have this plain chemical year level data. We are going to use chemical emitted by a manufacturing plant and then by a firm located in a particular state in a particular year. So that's like 5 layers of our labels. And so the total emission is here, like is measured by the phones. And then also the other firm characteristics. So it is a little bit complicated because it is difference in difference in difference. But the idea is that, again, as I mentioned, we are going to look at a particular chemical emitted by a particular plant of a particular firm at a particular state in a particular year. Okay, so we would like to see that it's the NBP regulated state, and then after the NBP implementation, and more importantly, it has to be high energy manufacturing firm, meaning that high energy consumption manufacturing firm. Because if you are a manufacturing firm and you don't use a lot of electricity, then NBP does not concern you, even through the supply chain. So it has to be the case that you are a manufacturing firm and you are using a lot of electricity. Hence, the regulated utility firm, when they pass through the cost via the higher electricity price, and then it affects you. Okay, so what we are intended to find is the beta 1. So meaning that when you are located at the NBP regulated state after 2004, and you are a high energy consumption manufacturing plant, then you are going to emit more harmful chemicals. So we anticipate that beta 1 is going to be positive. And then beta 1 plus beta 2, this is like the high energy consumption plants, their total chemical emission is also going to be increased compared with their counterparts. Okay. So this is the result. As we anticipated, look at the beta 1, no matter what kind of the fixed effect we add, if we add the plant fixed effect, year fixed effect, or the plant fixed effect together with chemical year fixed effect and also the firm controls, then we find that after the NBP implementation, the high energy consumption manufacturing plants, they are going to emit more chemicals compared with the low energy consumption plants. And then on top of that, if you look at the beta 1 plus beta 2, which is just looking at high energy consumption plants, the total emission of the chemical itself, we also find an increase. And the economic magnitude is not tiny. It's like 21% of the increase in terms of this emission. And because we are doing DID, so it's very natural to look at whether there is a pre-trend, and then we find there is no pre-trend existed. So it kind of verifies our claim that the upwind states, they do see NBP implementation as a shock. So there is no anticipation happening or going on in the previous years. Okay, and then let's look at the channel as we claimed, whether this is really through the abatement. So we conduct 3 tests, and hopefully with all these 3 tests together, we would be able to convince you that it's really going through this channel. So the first one we look at is whether this emission is via the form of air or water or ground. According to the EPA survey, air emission abatements are more costly. So you can imagine that if you are the effective manufacturing firm and you have to shut down abatement to save cost, then the first choice would be the most expensive one, which is the air. Okay, so that's first one. And also, again, according to the EPA, if you want to abatement for the harmful chemicals, it's also more costly. So if you have a choice, you want to shut down the abatement to save cost, then you are going to do this more energy consuming and costly one, which is the harmful chemicals. And the last one, there are 2 types of abatement activities. One is material and process modification. And this one has been shown to be more expensive, right? So if we are able to show that this is really through this pollution or what kind of the chemical, what kind of the way of emission, and what kind of the abatement activity are affected, then collectively, we will be able to provide you an economic channel to show that this is really through saving money via lowering the abatement activities. And that's what we find. The first one is that we do find that only the air emission are affected. The water and the ground are not affected, okay? The second one is that, well, the harmful chemicals are affected, although the other chemical in this column 3 are also significantly affected, but the economic magnitude is slightly smaller. And the last one is that we look at material and process multiplication versus the other practice, and we show that it's only the material and process multiplication abatement activities are significantly reduced. Okay, so collectively, we really want to show you is that it's really through like shutting down abatement activities of costly abatement such that either via the air pollution or via harmful chemicals or via the material and process modification. And then these firms, affected firm, will be able to save some money. The second one that we're trying to show you is that just look at whether you are able or willing to do that. The first one to look at is the economic constraint. So if you are a firm that you are already facing a very tight financial constraint, or you have a very low pricing power, so you cannot pass through your increased production cost shock to your customer. So utility passes through to you. If you cannot pass this through to your ultimate customer, then you are not able to absorb the shock. So one way to respond to this shock is to reduce your payment. So what we want to show you is that if you face a tighter financial constraint and lower product market pricing power, then you are more likely to increase your emission. So this is like whether you are capable or not to absorb the shock. And the second one is that we want to look at the managerial incentive. If you have a high power executive incentive, for example, if you have like high power delta and vega in your granted options, or whether you face a short-term short-termism, or if you have in a sense that if your shareholder are really pushing you to deliver short-term earnings target, and in that sense, you are going to shut down the payment, trying to keep the earnings as it is. Okay, and the third one is a similar idea. If your stock price are sensitive to the earnings and you don't want to deliver a negative earnings shock because your stock price is going to fall down, or you are listed firm. If you are listed firm, then you are facing analyst push. You are facing this short-term institutional investors push. Compare with a private firm, you have much long-term orientation to plan it. Okay, so overall, our result shows that this is really the constraint myopia manufacturing. They are going to cut the corner by reducing the cost of payment. So let me go through the result quickly for you. So we show that only the high financially constrained firms are affected, and only the lower pricing power firms are affected. Okay, and then if you look at the incentives for the managerial team, then it's only the one with high delta or high vega. High delta, high vega means that your granted option have a very high sensitivity to the stock price. So your personal wealth is affected if your stock price goes down. Okay, if you have a high delta. And then if you have more transient institutional investor, meaning that your institutional investor, they are impatient. They want you to deliver short-term earnings target. Okay, and if your stock price is very sensitive to the earnings news, then you would try to avoid to deliver a negative earnings. Okay, and finally, we show there is no result for the private firm. So this is kind of like complementary evidence to show that it's really the public firms facing shareholders push or analysts push such that they cut the corners by reducing the payment activities. Okay, so finally, let's look at whether this is really via the EPA's, there is a trade-off between the payment reduction and the EPA penalty. What we want to show you is that things only happen, the effect is only observed for the place where the attainment counties, whether the county have this attainment status, meaning that there would be a lower enforcement intensity from the EPA because this particular county has this attainment status. So meaning there is still some slack for the manufacturing firm to cut the payment. You can imagine that if you are in the high enforcement intensity neighborhood or in the counties, EPA, they are watching you. So there is no room for you to increase the pollution because the trade-off is not there, right? If you increase the pollution, then EPA are going to give you the fine. And then the cost that you save would not be enough to meet the EPA fine. So that does not make sense for you to have this trade-off. And we show that only the low EPA enforcement counties, you are going to observe the increase in the emission. Okay, and then by the same token, we do not find EPA fine goes up in this treated place. So that these two evidence together show that it's really the trade-off between whether you have the room of the slate to increase emission, and if you do, you do it. Okay, And finally, the welfare analysis, like who suffers. In the 2017 AER paper, they show that after the NBP implementation, on average in the treated state, people's health gets better. There are less like hospital cases in admissions, or they using hospital data to show that people do not go to hospital because of the lung issue, breathing issue, because the air quality gets better. So that is good. That's the average effect we see in a state. But what would happen? Because if you believe our earlier evidence that the high energy manufacturing plants, now they increase their emission. And the emission they increase is, first of all, is via the airborne. Second of all, they are harmful chemicals. So then we are interested in knowing that whether the very local air quality is indeed worsened. Okay, so you can imagine what we are doing is that we look at the very location of this high energy manufacturing plant, and we look at the air quality monitor around it, compare with the air quality monitor a few miles away from this high energy manufacturing plant, and let's see what would happen. Okay, and what we find is that if you are located, if the air quality monitor is located within 1 mile of this radius of this high energy consumption manufacturing plant, we do see that the air quality reading gets worsened. Okay, but if you extend it to 5 miles, 10 miles, then you don't observe it. Okay, so this is a very local air quality worsen effect. And who live close by to this like air quality or this high energy consumption manufacturing plants. And we show you that it's the low income, it's the people that below the poverty line, it's the people who pay lower rent, higher black ratio, and lower bachelor degree, and then more single mom. So you can imagine that this is really the underprivileged communities. They are living close by to this high energy consumption manufacturing plant. So our message is that although this regional environmental, so let me summarize. Okay, we did a lot of robustness checks, but due to the time, let me just summarize. So our message is very simple. Although this regional environmental regulation improves the air quality overall for the entire treated state, however, the story does not end up there. The high energy price is going to be passed through to the manufacturing firms, and these manufacturing firms are going to respond if they have this incentive, and if they are not able to absorb it in any other way, they are going to increase their emission of harmful chemical, particularly the air one, such that the very local air quality nearby these plants are going to be worsened, and the underprivileged communities live close by. So you can imagine that overall, ordinary people gets better air, but the underprivileged people gets worsened air due to this unintended emission spillover effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tse-Chun Lin. I'd like to give the floor to Michinao. Please.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to share my slide. Okay. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. First of all, thank you for giving me a great opportunity to discuss the Lin's paper about the NBP and the NOx, nitrogen oxides. And actually, I'm not the expert in this field. So first of all, I would like to review the nitrogen oxide itself. We frequently read the article about like a CO2 or like a PM 2.5, but NOx is less familiar. So I'd like to explain the NOx itself.
Okachi-san, can you make a full screen mode?
Oh, bigger.
Yeah. Maybe full screen mode or something.
Okay.
No, please.
This is too small.
Control L.
Control L. Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And no. Okay. Yeah. First of all, I would like to explain the NOx itself, and the NOx is a type of the air pollution, and for human, it has a effect on the respiratory disease such as asthma. And in Japan, the Yokkaichi asthma is quite famous. In Japanese, this is called like Yokkaichi Zensoku in Japanese, and NOx is one of the causes of like this historical pollution problem, and NOx also causes photochemical smog and acid rain, so it is quite problematic air pollution. And actually, for your information, the amount of the NOx emission is declining in the world. So according to the Goldberg et al., the amount of the emission is declining more than 3% every year. So the world is actually going to like a good way in terms of like emission of the NOx. And as like Mr. Lin explained, like, in order to suppress the amount of the NOx emission in the United States, the US introduced a cap and trade program in eastern part of the United States, and the other state had not implemented this program. So this difference provides a good opportunity to analyze like DID difference in difference analysis. And according to the Curtis, like, NBP had a great impact on the decline in the emission of the NOx. So based on that, based on the Curtis paper, the Mr. Lin analyzed like basically I think like a 2 point, analyze the 2 point re-examination of the impact of the NBP and the investigation of like a spillover effect. And Mr. Lin, Dr. Lin or Mr. Lin use like following the DDD model, the main model. This is the main model, and the dependent variable is the amount of the emission. And this one, okay. Oh, sorry. The amount of the emission, and the independent variables as follows. Okay, and the most important variable is or like most important term is the first one, NBP times the post times the high energy, and the NBP stands for the difference between the implementation of the NBP or not, and the post means that like a difference between the prior and the posterior to the introduction of the NBP. And third, the third like variable represents the difference between the high and low energy consuming plant. And the coefficient of the first term is like about estimated between like 31% and 48%, and this coefficient implies that high energy consuming plant emit more than the low energy consuming plant by the implementation of the NBP, and this is a comparison from the low energy consuming plant. So the low energy consuming plant is like a baseline plant. So and like low energy consuming plant decline the amount of emission by 9% after NBP. So thus like a high energy consuming plant emit more after NBP by about like 22% to 39%. So this implies that like, surprisingly, the amount of the emission of the high energy consuming plant was increased by the implementation of the NBP. So this implies that the high energy consuming plant does not make effort to reduce the emission in order to save cost. And he conducted many analyses to defend this argument. And I have like basically like 5 suggestions to improve your paper. And first, I hope you explain more about the spillover effect. It seems like I also get the implication of the spillover effect with this study, and through like a presentation, he like insisted like the magnitude of like a spillover effect, but it is not easy to find out the occurrence of the spillover effect from like this analysis. So maybe my understanding is like not so that well, but it's hard to find out the occurrence of the spillover effect itself from like your analysis. So however, like in my understanding, if your model assumes that only the time of the NBP times the post, okay, if like no, this. If you like if you assume like only the term of like second term and like the coefficient of like this term is negative, like we can say that the plant shift from like NBP state to like non-NBP state. However, this study assumes like many variables and terms, and the coefficient of the NBP times the post is negative, but like not significant. So that's like from this analysis, it is hard to get the implication of the spillover effect, I think. So if you insist the occurrence of the spillover effect from like your analysis, like I think like you need to explain more in your paper. And the secondary, I think the sample size in terms of time is small. The duration is from like 2000 to 2007. So the sample size in terms of time is 8, and the samples are like a sample of like pre and post NBP are like 4. Respectively. So this would be like a low efficient. So yeah, of course, like this is not your fault, but like the reason is that like duration of the NBP is quite short. So the small like sample size is it can be like an excuse, but but in this case, like instead of like OLS, probably like a generalized least square would be like appropriate for your estimation. And the third, I'm wondering that like adapting the control variable of like a production ratio is appropriate or not. So in your analysis, this control variable is defined as like a ratio of like a current year to previous year output. And I think this variable captures too much for the explanation of the dependent variable of the total emission. So as a proof, like a significance of like a statistical significance of this control variable is quite high in almost all models. So more than like 1% of the significant level. So this is quite significant. So this captures too much. And also like the variable of this production ratio may affect the other dependent variable. So the problem of the multicollinearity might be causing. So please examine whether like a multicollinearity is occurring or not. So maybe providing the value of the VIF, like a variance inflation factor, would be like needed, like to ease like referees like a mind. Yeah. And instead of like a production ratio variable, maybe like adding a trend variable might be better in your model. And Curtis also like adapt the trend variable instead of like production ratio. So maybe please consider like to use like a trend variable. And number 4, maybe it would be better for you like to make several figures like there's no figure for explanation of the result in your paper, and I think many paper using like a DID model provide a figure for like an enhancement of like an intuitive understanding of the readers. So the making figure would be better, I think, and yeah, at least like for the explanation of like a dynamic DID, the making figure would be like a beneficial, like so we can vividly understand the transition of the emission with like figures. So please make some like figures. And last but not the least, I think like this paper will be better if you emphasize the originality of the paper. Yeah. Actually, like this paper is like a typical case of the position-haven hypothesis, and a growing number of papers study this topic. And now, like advanced countries are like investing in environmentally regulated state of like countries. So this is because like the recent movement of like a sustainable finance or like ESG investment. So the time is changing. Like in your conclusion, the phenomenon of like position-haven hypothesis was like occurring in the United States in around like 2000s. But the recent like environmental like movement is changing from like 2000. So if you analyze with like latest data, the different conclusion can be obtained. So maybe the analysis of like 2000 is a little bit old, I think. And the next, the Yiyuan analysis is like quite similar to the paper of the Curtis in terms of the content and the methodology. So although like a Curtis adapt the employment as like a dependent variable, but employment and the total amount of the emission would be highly correlated. So if like if your paper would be like in this case, like your paper would be regarded as like a highly similar, quite similar to like a Curtis like paper. So you should emphasize what is different from like a Curtis paper, and you emphasize the originality and the contribution more based on your like analysis. But okay, that's all. Yeah. But anyway, this paper is a good paper, and yeah, I really enjoyed reading your paper, and I merely made a comment in order to improve your paper's quality. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tse-Chun. You like to react to this?
Yeah. So let me respond in the reverse chronological way. So in terms of the comparison with the Curtis paper, yes, Curtis paper looks into the employment of the affected manufacturing firm. What is found in the paper is that employment actually goes down. They don't hire new people anymore. So if employment is correlated with emission, the direction goes in the wrong way. Imagine that if you hire fewer people, then you should produce less and you should pollute less. What we find is the opposite. What we find is that this manufacturing firm, especially and actually only the high energy consumption manufacturing firm, they pollute more. Okay, so that's a very different conclusion. And it also has a very different implication. As I show you in the end, it's really the poor people, the underprivileged people who live around these manufacturing plants. They are suffering from the worsened air quality. So the originality of our paper is to show that if you look at any regional environmental regulation, you have to be very careful. It's not only the directly regulated firm, they are going to respond in the way that you may not like it. It's that even they don't do it, However, the consequences of this regulation, what if the price is passing through via the supply chain? And then the consumer of the electricity, they are going to increase their pollution. Their emission policy reacts in a negative fashion. Who are going to suffer? And we show you that it's the underprivileged people who are going to suffer. So this concerns me a lot, meaning that if a lot of us, a lot of academics and practitioners, we are paying attention to ESG, particularly the E. So we are trying to come up with, as economists, we are trying to come up with cap and trade. For example, recently in China, just introduced the first cap and trade for the carbon emission. So that is nice, that's our good direction. But what we are showing you in our paper is that such kind of regulation, you have to pay attention to the general equilibrium outcome, because even on average, the environment gets better. There are people suffering, and usually that's the weakest people suffering from this environmental regulation, and that's not in conclusion ever derived in the related literature. So that's the originality of our paper. Okay. So then the reason why we add this production ratio is because we don't want to show that the emission goes up and down because simply just the production is different. So that's why it's very important to control this production ratio. We don't want to show that because of electricity price goes up, so the manufacturing firm respond in terms of reduce their production. If that is the case, that's very mechanical and it's not very interesting. So what we show you is that after controlling the production ratio, the emission actually goes up. So that's very important. It's really via the abatement activity, not through just the sheer production activity. And that is why the production ratio has a very good explanatory power, because the more you produce, of course, the more you emit, right? So that's why we need to control for the production ratio. We just want to show you that given the same production, the same unit that a firm, a plant produces, now the emission of harmful chemical in terms of the air is worsened, is increased due to the reduction of abatement activities, okay? And the second comment is that we do use the weight. We do use weighting function. We use let me see. We use the number of the readings as a reading in our product, but I think you are right. We could run more like sophisticated either WLS or GLS, so that's fine. And in terms of the first comment, the DIDID, again, our focus is not just the NBP time the post. It's not our focus. As I mentioned in the very beginning, it's really the high energy consumption manufacturing plant. They are going to be affected. So it's the DIDID. So the focus is the beta 1, not the beta 2. Okay, so the focus is always the beta 1, which is the NBP dummy times the post dummy times the high energy consumption dummy. So beta 1 is our focus. And on top of that, we also look at the beta 1 plus beta 2, which is the total emission from this high energy consumption manufacturing plant. It's never the beta 2 alone. That's not our focus. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Beatrice, you had a question, remark.
Yes, it's partly a remark, because one way that I could interpret and read your paper is to say bad environmental regulation has unintended consequences. Because right now it might sound as if all environmental regulation has intended consequences. All have consequences in equilibrium, and that's what we may be targeting or not. Now, this kind of environmental regulation, I think, it's difficult and dangerous to then compare it with cap and trade of CO2, for instance, or even more importantly of CO2 equivalents, because we know that it's not only CO2. When we're talking about global environmental protection or warming, then it is the CO2 equivalent, all gases, and that is in fact good environmental regulation should be targeting more than one source of pollution, right? That's one way to turn it around and to draw policy implications from your paper would be that, in fact, when you target only part, then others may increase. And I think I agree with your sense that and by the way, there is, you're looking here at states, but the global dimension, again, we are talking about countries and regions, and that's even more interesting in the end, in my view. Carbon adjustment, border taxes are exactly being discussed for this reason. So you might want to maybe relate to that. The distributional findings that you are emphasizing is indeed very interesting. And again, there you might turn it around. Maybe you get bad environmental regulation because there is a political economy behind it in terms of who benefits and who does not from bad regulation. So I think it's worth exploring that, or more generally speaking, distributional effects both in space and across income classes of environmental regulation is something that we do not do sufficiently.
Thank you for your comments. I think that's very important as well. So I guess in the end of the day, we just want to deliver messages that do not just focus on the local effect, the regional environmental, just not look at the intended effects, pay attention to a broader picture, such that no matter what kind of the environmental policy that we look at, we will be able to have a more broader view, especially in terms of distributional effect. So thank you for the suggestion. We are going to look at the literature that you recommended.
Okay. Tamon, I also saw your hand. Tamon? Or Yiyuan?
Yes, can you hear me now? Hey,
Sure.
JP, it's an excellent
Hey.
paper. So as macroeconomists, by training, we always say, if you think about the GE effect, general equilibrium effect, we need to think about the counterfactor. If not, it's number one. Number two, if you look at the short-term versus long-term response, a firm have bad shock, for example, cost increasing in terms of carbon emission, whatever reason, any shock, negative shock, firm can endogenously respond. Okay, so that's the second thing. It might be worth to look at how firm respond, especially for long-term, whether they change either the environmentally whatever equipment or something else. The second one. Thirdly, I think also very important thing about really like a redistribution channel, which is also very important. Who's the winner, who's the loser, and ideally, because CEPR is a policy relevant, so think of policy makers, how to design. So if we take all your research, all your excellent funding, serious, also we need to do something, which is the subsidy, or do something else to overcome all this kind of design. Firstly, will never be prospect. Welfare, and so again, thank you very much. A great paper. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a very good comment. So let me just give you my personal example. I'm from Taiwan. When I was young, my neighborhood, I live in the middle part of the Taiwan, which is a country yard. The air was clean. So I can see the blue skies, mountains. At that point in time, when I was a kid, all the manufacturing plants are located close to the Taipei, which is the capital of Taiwan in the northern part. And then in the last 20 years, those factories slowly moved to my hometown. So then it turned out to be the case that the rich people who live in Taipei, now their air is clean. But my hometown, which is poor, now we are suffering from the poor air quality and poor local development as well. So that's kind of like partially inspires me to work on the distributional outcome of this environmental regulation. So when people are getting rich, they demand better air quality. So the best way to do it is to chase out all these manufacturing plants to other places. Now, where are these places? These are the places where poor people are living. And that's what concerns me most.
Can I
Yeah,
make a comment?
Yes.
sure.
Yes, I have a very interesting paper. I thought one is that very similar to the last paper of the morning session by Yiyuan. It's talking about like regulatory circumvents of the capital control that creating shadow banks in China or something. But it's really, this is also kind of another regulatory circumvention on the regulation of the environmental policy. And then it's not really a general agreement, it's just I believe it's more like circumvention regulation, and which makes this indeed quite rational in the sense toxic kind of polluting local air means always risk of a lawsuit in the future. We call litigation, right? So risk of lawsuit is really a probability of lawsuit times compensation amount. However, in a poor neighborhood, compensation amount, other than probability of lawsuit is probably lower. That way, it's very rational that those factories will be located in a poor neighborhood. But that's rational. That means that at the same time, it's actually a good thing in a sense. They are kind of behaving rationally. That means if the policy raise penalty on those activities, they will behave according to the penalty too. So that means they are choosing poor neighborhood means that economic incentive works. At least on that part, I have some hope. I have some hope on the future design of the policy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. So what we show is that only the place which have this attainment status, they are going to increase the emission because they don't have to worry about the EPA monitoring pressure. So it really depends on what would be the enforcement design and also the penalty design for the environmental regulation. So if you touch one and if you do not touch the others, it could be the case of these unintended consequences shifting along the supply chain. So that's another message we try to deliver. It's actually a key message. And then second one, then we discovered this distributional channel, and we are equally interested by that.
Okay, Beatrice, you had another question. I saw a yellow hand.
But it was just basically it was just a reaction to your last the story, very impressive story you told, and I recommend that you use that in future presentations because it does really clarify where you come from. But it also, to me, has completely illustrated my point about the endogeneity of such policies, in the sense that, if there is demand from powerful interest groups to have clean air, then their air gets cleaned up, right? So as long as environmental regulation, and again, that was my first point, we have to really distinguish between what is local, regional, and what is global in terms of the gases that are involved. But when it is about local and regional clean air, then political economy plays a huge role, and I think you might want to think about that as the driver also, not only as the so in that sense it would be an intended consequence of that kind of policy.
Yes, thank you. Good point.
Tamon, you also had a question or remark? Tamon? Tamon?
I think he's frozen.
Yeah.
Tamon? Okay, he's...
Yeah, Tamon has been some trouble on and off.
Okay, other questions or remarks?
Can I have one footnote?
Yes.
As a TC, maybe one thing we also call externality coming from weather. For example, even two regions the same. The wind, the heavy winds, the UK, heavy wind. The wind referring to all the pollution to your everything the same. Maybe your wind also weather is kind of as a shock and better identification. If you have any IV for that thing. Thank you.
Thank you. For our last analysis about air quality, we do control for the weather and the wind. So that's the typical controls in the literature. But using weather as a shock, we can think about it. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no further questions, I would like to end this session here. It comes to the end of today's workshop.
We have a concluding remarks by.
Yeah. I come to that, of course. I know.
Okay.
But first, I'd like to thank Tse-Chun Lin and Michinao for excellent presentation and discussion. So thank you so much. I'd like to give the floor to Beatrice for concluding remarks. Beatrice.